In the quiet hours of the night, when the world outside lies still and silent, many people find themselves abruptly awake. The clock may read 3:13 a.m. or perhaps 4:27 a.m. You lie there, eyes open, mind alert, but the room is dark, the air heavy, and silence floods the space. Often the first thought is one of irritation or concern. Why am I awake? Or something must be wrong with me. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the very fact that you're awake in this sacred window of the early morning is not a problem to be solved, but a message to be heard? The body is not broken. It's calling. We have been conditioned to treat the body as a machine, something that functions predictably, something that we push, stretch, punish, and medicate into performance. If it echoes, we silence it. If it tires, we force it. If it stirs in the night, we assume it is malfunctioning. But this way of thinking ignores a deeper truth, that the body is not a separate vessel, but a finely tuned, intelligent system in constant conversation with the mind, the spirit, and the world around it. Waking up between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not a random error. In traditional Chinese medicine, this time frame is associated with the lung meridian, the energetic pathway connected to grief, breath, and the movement of life force, or qi, through the body. It is a time of purification emotionally and energetically. The lungs, associated with both respiration and the release of sorrow, are at their peak function during these hours. If you are waking, you are aligning, even unconsciously, with a deeper cycle of healing and renewal. The body does not whisper without reason. In the silence of the early morning, distractions vanish. There is no rush of traffic outside your window, no endless notifications, no demands being made of your attention. The world has stepped aside, and what remains is pure awareness, the kind you cannot access when your senses are flooded with external noise. And it is in this rare moment of stillness that the body, not as flesh and bone, but as a wise, feeling entity, chooses to speak. For some, the call might manifest as a racing heart or shallow breath. For others, a sense of restlessness, a tightness in the chest, or a sudden clarity that strikes like lightning in the dark. The body uses the language of sensation to speak. It cannot speak in English or in thought. It speaks through feeling. And these feelings, so often dismissed or resisted, are invitations. They invite you to pause, to observe, to listen, without judgment, without analysis. Consider how easily we label discomfort as dysfunction. We wake up, feel something unfamiliar, and immediately assume something is wrong. But what if, instead of fighting these signals, we welcome them? What if waking up at 3:30 a.m. is not insomnia, but a signal flare from your unconscious mind rising to the surface to ask, will you listen to me now? Because during the day, we rarely do. We move fast. We speak more than we listen. We eat without tasting. We work without resting. We survive without reflecting. But in the pre-dawn hours, all of that collapses. There is no performance, no audience, no expectations. There is just you, raw, real, and receptive. And in that state, your body may finally feel safe enough to release the tension it's been holding on to. The thoughts you've been suppressing, the emotions you've been avoiding, the mind is loud, but the body is persistent. And when its softer messages go unheard, it finds new ways to get your attention, through tension, through tightness, through wakefulness in the hours when the rest of the world sleeps. This is not a malfunction. It is a message that you've reached the edge of something, a limit in your lifestyle, in your beliefs, in your patterns of thought, and that your inner system is sounding the alarm, not to frighten you, but to awaken you. The call may not always come in the form of pain. Sometimes it comes through sudden clarity, a realization about your relationship, a flash of memory, a sense that something is out of alignment. You might find yourself wide awake, heart pounding, not because of fear, but because your deeper self is trying to rise to the surface, trying to be heard through the noise of everything you've been ignoring. You may ask, why now? Why in these hours of darkness does the body speak? Because the world is quiet enough for you to finally listen. At 3 a.m., there are no emails to check, no meetings to prepare for, no calls to return. There is no one asking anything of you. The only voice you hear is your own, or perhaps the one you've silenced for far too long. It rises not to scare you, but to reconnect you to something real, the rhythm of your breath, the weight of your emotions, the awareness of your presence. That reconnection, however small, is healing. It is realignment. It is a return to wholeness. The body remembers what the mind forgets. It knows when you are not aligned. It knows when your life, your energy, your relationships, or your environment are out of sync with your truth. And instead of screaming in the daylight, it whispers in the dark. There are hours in the day when activity reaches its peak. When alarms go off, traffic fills the streets, conversations echo through buildings, and responsibilities begin to stack on top of one another like bricks forming walls around our awareness. These hours are necessary for function, but they are rarely sacred. The mind becomes absorbed in logistics, obligations, roles, and identities that we wear like armor. We perform. We survive. We move from one task to the next, rarely noticing that the deeper part of us, the observer, the soul, the silent witness, has long since fallen asleep beneath the surface of our thoughts. But there is another time, a quiet, hidden window that many overlook or misunderstand. A span of hours often regarded with discomfort or confusion. Between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the sky remains dark, the city is hushed, and most of the world is suspended in a vulnerable state of unconsciousness. This period is more than just a fragment of the night. It is a window of spiritual clarity, a portal to awareness that cannot be accessed through the noise of daytime hours. In ancient spiritual disciplines, this window was never wasted. It was not merely part of the sleep cycle. It was the hour of Brahma in Vedic tradition, the time before sunrise, believed to be the most auspicious for meditation, prayer, self-reflection, and communion with the divine. Buddhist monks, Shaolin practitioners, yogis, mystics, and seekers of many paths have, for centuries, risen before dawn not because they sought discipline for its own sake, but because they understood something subtle yet profound. The mind is quietest when the world is asleep. During these hours, the veil between your conscious and unconscious mind is thinnest. The veil between your ego and your soul begins to dissolve. The masks that you wear for others and the ones you wear for yourself momentarily fall away. Without the burdens of schedules or the interruption of stimulation, you are free to meet yourself as you truly are, not who you pretend to be, not who you perform to be, but the silent you, the still you, the self that observes without rushing to react. In this sacred stillness, clarity is not something you create. It is something that arises naturally. But for most people, waking up at this hour feels like a disruption, an inconvenience, something to fix. You wake up at 3:37 a.m. and reach for your phone, hoping a little blue light will lull you back into sleep. But sleep does not come. Instead, you toss and turn. Frustrated, restless, perhaps even anxious. You wonder what's wrong with your body. You consider the coffee you drank yesterday, the stress you've been under, the thoughts you can't quiet. But what if, instead of labeling the moment as a problem, you saw it as a gift? What if the clarity that you've been seeking, the answers you've been trying to force through conscious thought, are already rising, uninvited, through the cracks in your defenses? This clarity is not always gentle. Sometimes it confronts you with truths you've avoided. You may see clearly that a relationship is out of alignment, or that the work you do no longer feeds your soul. You may become aware of something unresolved, an emotion you never allowed yourself to feel fully, a conversation you never had, a truth you never acknowledged. This is why so many fear the silence, not because it is empty, but because it is honest, because in the absence of distraction, we are forced to feel. But clarity is not only confrontation, it is also connection. You may find that during these hours, you suddenly understand something about your life that eluded you before. A simple insight may emerge, not because you thought your way to it, but because you finally became still enough to receive it. You may experience a spontaneous wave of gratitude, a moment of beauty, even in the dark, a realization that you are held, that you are whole, that nothing needs to be different for this moment to be enough. Spiritual clarity is rarely loud. It arrives quietly, not in shouts, but in subtle shifts, not in lightning bolts, but in the gentle lifting of fog. This window between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not random. The body, the breath, and the mind all undergo subtle shifts during these hours. The nervous system enters a state of deep restoration. Melatonin still circulates in the bloodstream, keeping the brain in a partially dreamlike state. This creates a rare bridge, a neurological state where we are not fully asleep, but not entirely awake either. This bridge allows access to theta and delta brain waves, which are associated with creativity, intuition, and connection with the subconscious. In waking life, we spend most of our time in beta, alert, active, and problem-solving. In deep sleep, we drop into delta. But during this liminal window, the mind dances between alpha and theta, the states associated with meditation, hypnosis, flow, and spiritual insight. In this space, we are most connected to the inner self, the self that remembers things the rational mind forgets, the self that feels rather than analyzes, the self that knows. And yet, most people miss it. They try to sedate themselves back into unconsciousness. They see wakefulness as failure, as disruption. They do not realize that the universe does not always schedule clarity on their terms. Sometimes it whispers at 4:42 a.m., and if you're willing, not even to get up, but simply to listen, you may hear what you could not hear at any other time. You may see not with your eyes, but with your awareness. You may feel not anxiety, but alignment. Because the external world does not determine when truth arrives. Truth arises in stillness. And stillness, more than any other time, lives in this sacred window when the stars still shine, when the wind moves slowly, and when the noise of the world gives way to the presence of the soul. In a world obsessed with movement, speed is often mistaken for progress. We are taught that to be still is to fall behind, to stop is to fail, and to rest is to waste time. From the earliest moments of our lives, we are conditioned to perform, to accomplish, to remain in a state of constant becoming. The days blur together in a sequence of motion, activity, and reaction. The body moves, the mind races, and the heart forgets how to sit in silence without seeking something to chase. But there is another way, an ancient rhythm that the modern world has forgotten. It does not come from striving, nor does it arise through struggle. It comes from stillness. Stillness is not simply the absence of sound or action. It is a state of awareness, a quality of attention that is undisturbed by the surface-level noise of life. In stillness, the mind is not asleep, nor is it dull. It is awake but quiet, alert but at ease. It does not try to control the moment. It does not resist what is. It simply watches, without attachment, without urgency, without fear. And in this watching, something remarkable begins to unfold: clarity, insight, truth. Stillness is not passive. It is deeply active in its own subtle way. To remain still in a world that glorifies distraction is a form of inner strength. To sit with yourself, with no music, no phone, no entertainment, no escape, is to confront the parts of you that cannot be reached in motion. In the stillness, the ego becomes quiet. The constant narration of the mind begins to slow. And beneath that chatter, something else begins to rise. A deeper knowing, an inner teacher that speaks not in words, but in feelings, in intuitions, in awareness. You begin to notice things that once escaped your attention. The way your breath feels when it moves in and out. The subtle tightness in your chest that you've been carrying all day. The thoughts you've been avoiding. The emotions you've been numbing. The stories you tell yourself just to get through. All of these rise to the surface not to overwhelm you, but to teach you. Because the mind will not always give you answers. But the body, in stillness, will offer you truth. It is only in stillness that we come to see how reactive we've become. How we jump from one stimulus to the next, chasing dopamine, avoiding discomfort, filling every empty space with noise. The phone buzzes, we check it. A thought arises, we follow it. A moment of boredom arrives, we escape it. But if we were to pause, if we were to resist the urge to run, we would discover that discomfort is not our enemy. It is our mirror. It reflects back to us the very parts of ourselves we need to see. The fears we have not faced, the grief we have buried, the doubts we hide even from ourselves. Stillness invites us into the presence of all that we are, not just the parts we show the world, but the hidden ones, the vulnerable ones, the sacred ones. And this is what makes stillness a teacher. Not because it entertains us, but because it reveals us. It strips away the layers we've accumulated from years of trying to be something for someone else. It shows us where we are holding tension. In the shoulders, in the stomach, in the jaw, not as a physical condition, but as a symptom of emotional resistance. It shows us how often we breathe shallowly, how quickly we abandon the present, how rarely we meet ourselves without judgment. When you sit in stillness long enough, you begin to understand that healing does not always come through effort. Sometimes it comes through surrender, through allowing what is already inside of you to rise and be seen. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to label it. You just have to witness it. Because awareness alone begins to dissolve what you once thought was permanent. The pain softens, the thoughts slow, the heart opens. And in that opening Insight begins to flow, not forced but offered. Many people avoid stillness because they are afraid of what they will find. They fear the emptiness, the silence, the rawness of unfiltered being. But stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness. The fullness of presence, of truth, of being with life exactly as it is, without needing it to be different. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about coming home to the person you already are beneath all the noise. In the ancient traditions, from the Shaolin temple to the Himalayan caves, stillness was not seen as luxury. It was a necessity, a discipline, a space for recalibration. Warriors, monks, and masters alike understood that stillness was not separate from action. It was what made action precise. Just as an archer must become still before releasing the arrow, we must become still before choosing our direction. Without stillness, we act from habit, from fear, from ego. With stillness, we act from clarity, from alignment, from presence. Even the breath, the most basic function of life, teaches this. When we are agitated, the breath becomes short, irregular, tight. When we are at peace, it slows, deepens, returns to its natural rhythm. The breath does not lie. It reflects the state of the mind and the heart. And when you sit in stillness, the breath becomes your anchor. You follow it in. You follow it out. You let it guide you back to what is real. You may discover that in stillness, there are answers you were too busy to receive, ideas you were too noisy to hear, feelings you were too afraid to feel. But now they rise, not to overwhelm you, but to teach you how to be with them, how to integrate them, how to allow them space to move and transform. There is a rhythm in life that exists long before we are even aware of it. It begins before our first thought, and it carries us through our entire existence, moment by moment, silently, faithfully, without needing our permission. That rhythm is the breath. It is the only bodily function that operates both voluntarily and involuntarily. We can choose to control it, but when we forget, it continues on its own. This duality is not accidental. It is sacred. The breath is the bridge between body and mind, between consciousness and unconsciousness, between the seen and the unseen. It is the thread that ties us to the present, to the self, to the now. We often ignore this bridge because it's always there. It asks nothing of us. It performs no drama. But within it lies immense power. The breath can calm the mind. It can slow the heartbeat. It can soften fear, reduce anger, deepen awareness. It can bring clarity without thought, peace without words, and presence without effort. And yet most people spend their entire lives breathing without ever becoming aware that they are breathing at all. In moments of chaos, we look for solutions outside of ourselves. We search for answers in books, in advice, in analysis. But one of the most profound tools we possess has been with us since birth, unnoticed, unappreciated. The breath, in its simplicity, holds within it the ability to restore balance, to return the wandering mind to stillness, and to reconnect us with the part of ourselves that is always watching, always present, always aware. When you are anxious, your breath changes. It becomes shallow, rapid, sharp. It signals to the nervous system that something is wrong, even if there is no real threat. The body enters fight or flight. The heart races, muscles tense, the mind begins to spiral. But the breath, if it is the trigger, can also be the cure. Slow it down and the body follows. Deepen it and the mind begins to settle. Extend the exhale and the message to the nervous system shifts. You are safe. There is no danger here. You may rest now. This is why the breath is more than air moving in and out of the lungs. It is the messenger. It is the translator of our internal state. It reflects what we feel, often before we have the words for it. And because of this, it is also the gateway to influence what we feel. Not through force, but through presence. The breath teaches us that we do not need to conquer the mind to change the state of our being. We only need to become aware of it. We only need to return to the breath. In ancient traditions, the breath was never taken for granted. It was studied, honored. Disciples would spend years mastering the art of conscious breathing before they were allowed to move deeper into spiritual teachings. Why? Because if you cannot master the breath, you cannot master the mind. If you cannot control the breath, you remain a slave to your thoughts, to your emotions, to the fluctuations of circumstance. The breath is the tether. It grounds the mind in the body. And when both are aligned, the spirit has space to rise. You don't have to sit in perfect silence on a mountain to feel this. You only need a few seconds, a moment in traffic, a pause before you speak, an awareness as you walk. The breath is always with you. And because of that, so is your access to peace. It is not about lengthening every inhale or counting every exhale. It is about remembering that you have a choice. When life begins to feel chaotic, you can choose to come back to the breath. When you are lost in thought, you can choose to breathe your way back to the present. When you feel overwhelmed, you can choose to create space between the sensation and the reaction. And that space begins with the breath. There is a difference between breathing and being breathed. Most of us are being breathed unconsciously, reactively, passively. But when you shift from being breathed to breathing, with awareness, with intention, you step into a place of power, you return to your center. You are no longer pulled and pushed by every thought, by every sensation, by every trigger. You are aware. You are steady. You are rooted in the now. The breath is not just for survival. It is a vehicle for transformation. When you sit with your breath, when you observe it, feel it, and allow it to flow freely, you begin to sense a presence beneath the surface of thought, a stillness that is untouched by noise, a quiet observer that is always there, patiently waiting to be noticed. The breath leads you to this presence. It clears the fog of overthinking. It quiets the waves of emotion. It invites you to remember the simplicity of being alive here now. You may begin to notice how each breath is slightly different from the one before. Some are shorter, some deeper. Some feel restricted, others free. The breath mirrors the state of your inner world. And as you become more familiar with this mirror, you learn to respond instead of react. You begin to soften where you once tensed. You begin to notice where you once numbed. You begin to slow down where you once rushed. Not because someone told you to, but because your breath guided you there. In the moments when you wake between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., when the world is quiet and the mind is alert, the breath becomes especially important. In those hours, you are vulnerable, open, exposed. The mind can easily spiral into fear, reflection, regret, or planning. But the breath anchors you. It reminds you that you are not your thoughts. You are not your worries. You are not the sensations rising in your body. You are the awareness that is breathing through it all. The breath brings you home, not to sleep, but to presence, not to escape, but to alignment. In moments of silence, especially those that arrive uninvited in the deep of night, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., there is a tendency in the modern mind to seek immediate explanation. Why am I awake? What's wrong with me? How do I get back to sleep? The mind races to label, to solve, to fix. We are conditioned to believe that every discomfort, every interruption, every pause in our routine must be met with logic, with reasoning, with quick solutions. But some moments are not meant to be solved. Some awakenings are not meant to be silenced. They are meant to be witnessed. They are meant to be felt. And above all, they are meant to be questioned, not answered. We are taught to value answers. In school, in work, in conversation, the right answer is rewarded, the wrong one corrected. But rarely are we taught to ask the right question. Rarely are we told that the quality of our lives is not determined by how quickly we answer what life throws at us, but by how deeply we inquire into it. Answers can be memorized, but questions, the right questions, must arise from awareness. When you find yourself awake in those quiet, sacred hours, eyes open, heart aware, breath heavy or shallow, you are in a state where the subconscious speaks more freely. The distractions of the day have fallen away. The walls between your conscious mind and your deeper truth are thin, perhaps thinner than at any other time. The mind may want to interpret, to analyze, to define what is happening, but this is not the time for answers. It is the time for inquiry. Not all questions demand words. Some are felt, breathed, sensed rather than spoken. They linger like smoke in the stillness. They press gently against the edge of your awareness, not to be solved, but to be sat with. Because real transformation does not come from declaring what is, but from exploring what could be, from allowing space for mystery, for revelation, for surrender. And the only way that space can be opened is through the act of asking. Not demanding, not controlling, just asking. Ask what wants my attention right now. Not how do I go back to sleep, but what is this wakefulness trying to reveal? What part of me feels unseen? What emotion am I avoiding during the day that rises in the quiet hours? Is there a truth I've been suppressing? Is there something I need to release that I'm still holding on to? These questions do not have to be answered immediately. In fact, they should not be, because if the answer comes too fast, It is likely coming from the surface mind, the logical, rehearsed, habitual mind that seeks control and certainty. But real truth does not rise that way. Real truth often emerges slowly. It moves like water seeping through cracks in stone. It needs time, space, patience. To ask without answering is to make space. It is to say to the deeper self, I am listening. I am not here to force you into clarity. I am here to hold space for whatever arises. That kind of asking becomes a practice of surrender, a recognition that we are not always meant to be in control, that we do not need to explain everything in order to move through it. That presence, not certainty, is often the most healing thing we can offer ourselves. We often approach our inner world the same way we approach our outer world, like a puzzle to be solved. But the soul does not respond to interrogation. It opens in response to gentle invitation. It does not open when shouted at or demanded from. It opens when it is honored. And the act of asking, without the urgency of answering, is an act of honoring the complexity of your inner world. In the moments between night and morning, when your body is awake but the world is still, there is an opportunity to ask questions that the daylight would not allow. Because in daylight, we are too busy pretending we know. We are too busy performing the answers we've been taught to believe. But in darkness, we can admit what we don't know. We can allow ourselves to be students of the moment, not masters of it. You may find that the questions you ask in the early morning hours follow you through the day, not in a way that distracts, but in a way that deepens. You may find that a question you asked at 400 a.m., one that felt distant and unclear, begins to unfold slowly as the hours pass. A conversation later may suddenly seem connected. A memory might return. A pattern might become visible. These are not accidents. They are the slow answers to the deep questions you dared to ask without rushing. And sometimes the answer is not a word at all. Sometimes the answer is a change in feeling, a sense of peace where there was anxiety, a quiet mind where there was noise, a shift in energy that cannot be named but can be felt. In these moments, it becomes clear the question did not need to be solved. It simply needed to be held. To ask without needing to answer is to trust in something beyond the intellect. To trust in timing, in inner wisdom, in intuition. It is to acknowledge that not all knowledge is linear. Not all clarity comes through thought. Some clarity arrives through being, through staying, breathing, watching, through becoming comfortable in the unknown. We often ask life questions and then try to force it to respond. But life responds in its own time. The subconscious responds in images, in emotions, in dreams. It speaks the language of symbol and sensation, not sentence. And it will not offer what we are not ready to hear. So instead of demanding that it answer on our terms, we must return again and again to the question. Gently, patiently, with humility. We must return not to interrogate but to learn. In the stillness of night, ask. In the noise of the day, continue to ask. And then allow whatever arises to teach you in its own time, in its own way, through its own unfolding. In the rhythm of daily life, we are conditioned to resume quickly. Something interrupts us, a thought, a feeling, a disruption. And almost instinctively, we return to routine without pause. The alarm goes off, and we rise without question. We feel a discomfort in the body, and we suppress it. We wake in the middle of the night, and we immediately try to go back to sleep. But resumption without realignment is dangerous. It is like continuing a journey without checking your compass. You may be moving, but you are not moving in the right direction. There is a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes loud, that occurs after disturbance, after awakening, after a sudden shift in awareness. And in that moment, we are given a choice to return to sleep, to work, to conversation, to movement, or to take a breath and recenter. To realign, to ask ourselves, what state am I resuming in? What energy am I carrying back into the day or back into the night? Because the truth is, when we re-enter without reflection, we bring the residue of misalignment with us. The thoughts we didn't finish processing, the emotions we didn't allow space for, the tension we didn't fully release. They do not vanish just because we've chosen to move on. They follow us, they linger, they accumulate. Realignment before resumption is the practice of intentional re-entry. It is the discipline of pausing, not to delay progress, but to ensure that progress is not simply motion, that it is direction, that it is conscious, that it is aligned with what truly matters. This applies to the grand moments of life, and it applies equally to the smallest ones. Waking up in the middle of the night, for instance, is not merely a sleep disturbance. It is a threshold. And how you cross that threshold determines whether you carry forward anxiety or awareness. When you wake at 3:22 a.m., something has stirred within you. Whether it's your body, your subconscious, or something deeper, the point is, you've been opened. Your awareness has been pulled into the present. Your mind is alert, your senses heightened. This is not the time to rush back into unconsciousness. This is a moment to recalibrate, to observe, to take inventory of what is arising before slipping back into the rhythm of sleep. Realignment in these early hours does not require effort. It does not demand that you fix anything. It simply invites you to become present, to notice what is happening inside the body, to notice the pace of your breath, to become aware of any emotional weight pressing on the chest or resting in the stomach. Realignment is not control. It is recognition. It is the act of noticing without resistance, without the urgency to label or change. Because when you realign, you don't force the mind to be silent. You offer it space. You offer the body permission to soften. You create conditions that are safe enough for your internal systems to begin returning to their natural state. And when they do, what follows is not just sleep or focus or conversation. What follows is harmony, movement now rooted in presence, action now rooted in clarity. Most people carry disconnection into the next thing without realizing it. They argue with a loved one, then answer a work call. They experience anxiety, then force themselves into productivity. They wake up in the night disturbed, then try to drift off again without acknowledging the disruption. But energy, when unacknowledged, does not resolve, it becomes suppressed, it moves underground. And suppressed energy does not disappear, it distorts. It twists into fatigue, into irritability, into numbness, into confusion. The body knows something is unbalanced, but the mind is too focused on continuation to notice. This is why realignment must become a habit, not a rare event, but a consistent inner practice, a ritual of checking in, of returning to the breath, of feeling the weight in your body, of asking, am I in the right state to move forward, or am I carrying tension that needs to be witnessed first? This is not indulgent. This is wisdom, because when you move forward misaligned, you sabotage the very thing you are trying to return to. Sleep does not heal when the mind is racing. Work is not productive when the heart is burdened. Conversations are not truthful when the self is disconnected. Realignment begins with honesty, not performance, not force, just honesty. It is the courage to pause before pretending everything is fine. It is the willingness to say, I need a breath before I continue. I need a moment before I engage again. I need to feel what I'm carrying so that I don't carry it blindly into the next thing. This small act, repeated with intention, transforms everything. It rewires how you respond to life. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer at the mercy of the next demand. You are choosing how to re-enter. You are choosing to return to your center before continuing forward. And it doesn't take long. Sometimes realignment is a single breath, a closing of the eyes, a hand placed on the chest, a whispered reminder, be here now. Other times it may take longer, a walk in silence, a page written in a journal, a few minutes of conscious breathing in the darkness before returning to bed. The form does not matter. What matters is that you pause long enough to notice, that you create space between what disrupted you and what you return to. Because real alignment cannot be forced, it must be allowed, it must be invited. And only you can create the conditions for that to happen. Only you can know when you are trying to rush back into something before you are truly ready. The world will not tell you to pause. It will not reward you for recalibrating. It will keep asking you to move faster, to go now, to pick up where you left off. But just because the world moves that way does not mean you have to. The more you practice this inner pause, this brief, sacred checking in with yourself, the more you begin to protect your energy. You stop leaking presence. You stop pretending you're fine. You stop performing your way through exhaustion or sadness or confusion. Realignment is the subtle art of tuning yourself like an instrument before playing again. It is the return to your original frequency before emitting another sound. It is the space between the breath and the next step. The space where intention is born, where clarity returns, where presence is rebuilt.